Welcome back to Yoga Therapy Thursdays. This week we're talking about stretching out our hip flexors. For many of us, our hip flexors are chronically tight. We're constantly seated at a desk, a couch, a chair, or even in the car. So one of the best ways to stretch out our hip flexors is to do a lunge. Now, many of us know how to do a lunge, but there are a couple of different ways to approach it. So standing up, one foot goes in front, one foot goes in back. Easy peasy. Your feet are not in the same track. There should be space. If I were to bring my feet back together, they wouldn't touch. From here, the front leg bends, but for some of us, we might not need a deep bend to still feel the stretch. This back knee can also be bent. This isn't about how straight we can get our leg. This is about feeling the stretch in the hip flexor. If we bend our back knee, we allow the stretch to come into the hip instead of tilting our hips forward and just straightening our leg. So from your lunge, you're going to want to bend the front knee and possibly even the back knee. You want your shoulders and hips in a line perpendicular to the floor. Your knee, your back knee, can be behind your hip, or it can even be in line with your hip. You just want to make sure you're not tilting your hips forward. Notice if you feel the stretch on the front side of your thigh. That's where you're stretching out your hip flexors. Another stretch we can do is a low lunge. And despite what you may think, low lunges are actually more difficult than high lunges. With a low lunge, your bottom leg is stuck on the floor. It can't go down. You could go up, but that requires muscular strength. So once your leg is in place, you can't easily move out of it. You can't easily adjust and come out of the pose. What that does ensure is that you're getting a nice deep stretch through your hip flexor. But please be cautious. Make sure you have whatever padding you need for your knees, and make sure you're only going as far as sensation. So in your low lunge, it's the same thing as your high lunge. You want to make sure your legs are not in the same track. Make sure your knee is above your ankle, and your back knee can be directly underneath your hip if that's where you are. You can use blocks to lift yourself up. You can place your hands on your thigh, and you can even start to straighten out of that front leg to compensate for any tightness in your hip. So from here, we want to make sure our hips are neutral. Make sure that they're not tilted forward and that we're leaning forward. To get the most out of this stretch, we want to make sure our hips are square to the front edge of the mat and also perpendicular to the floor. Then shoulder and hip are in alignment and perpendicular to the floor, and then this knee is just wherever it is. So if you need to back off of the stretch a little bit, start to straighten your front leg. If you need more, start to lean into the front leg, but make sure your hips stay in the same position. As always, remember to do both sides. Breathe throughout your practice and notice if things move beyond sensation. I'm going to say it again. Starting Constructive Rest, mobilize first, strengthen, and then stretch. See you next week on Yoga Therapy Thursdays.